The late afternoon sun hung low over the Arizona territory, turning the endless prairie into a sea of gold. Dust rolled across the open land in long waves, pushed by a dry wind that whispered through the sagebrush. A lone cowboy, Luke Ryder, rode slowly along the trail with his hat tilted down, his boots dusty, and his horse moving at a tired but steady pace. Luke had spent weeks alone on cattle drives, sleeping under the stars with only coyotes and the crackle of campfires for company. He liked the peaceful silence, even if it sometimes reminded him how empty his life had become. But as he approached the old Apache route, something unusual caught his eye: movement near a broken wagon sitting crooked beside a dried creek bed. Luke slowed his horse. A slim woman stood beside the wagon, her long dark hair whipping in the wind, her dress torn at the edges. Two small children clung to her legs, their faces thin, their eyes wide with fear and hunger. The sight made Luke frown. No woman, especially not with children, should be stranded in such a barren stretch of land. He guided his horse closer, raising a hand in a calm gesture. "Ma'am," he called gently, "you folks in trouble?" The woman looked up. There was exhaustion written across her face, real, deep exhaustion that comes only from days of fear and struggle. "My name is Ayanna," she said in a soft voice. "Our wagon broke 2 days ago. We've been walking and hoping someone would pass." Her accent carried the melody of the Apache tongue, but her English was clear. The children tightened their grip on her skirt, too frightened even to speak. Luke dismounted slowly so as not to scare them. He crouched beside the wagon, examining the broken axle. "This won't ride again anytime soon," he said quietly. "Where were you headed?" "To my tribe," she answered. "They moved toward the mountains. But we fell behind, and then the cold nights came." She pulled her blanket tighter around the children. "I tried to keep them warm, but," her voice cracked, "just for a moment." Luke felt something in his chest tighten. He had seen suffering before: hard winters, starving families, men lost to the frontier, but something about this woman standing alone in the wind struck him differently. Maybe it was her strength, holding herself upright even though everything was against her. Maybe it was the way the children's eyes pleaded silently for safety. Or maybe it was simply because Luke understood what it meant to lose everything. He had lived that once. "I've got water," he said gently. "And food at my camp, just a mile back. Let me help you." Ayanna hesitated, glancing at her children, then back at him. Trust did not come easily for someone who had lost so much. But desperation is stronger than fear. She gave a small nod. Luke lifted the smallest child into his arms and motioned for Ayanna to follow. As they walked toward his horse, the wind quieted, as if the prairie itself was holding its breath. And though Luke didn't know it yet, the moment he stopped to help that broken wagon was the moment his lonely life began to change forever. Luke led Ayanna and her children toward the small camp he had set up earlier that day. The sky above them shifted from gold to a deep orange, the early signs of night creeping across the land. Coyotes would start howling soon, another reason Luke wanted them off the open prairie as fast as possible. He helped Ayanna onto his horse, lifting the children up beside her, while he walked ahead on foot, guiding the reins through the tall grass. "You'll be safe here for the night," he said as they reached a sheltered spot between two rock outcrops. A faint fire still smoldered where he had cooked his supper. Luke tossed more wood onto it, creating a steady flame that lit the weary faces of Ayanna and her children. The smallest child, maybe 5 years old, held onto a tin cup of water with trembling hands. Luke softened his voice. "Easy now. Drink slow. Water's cold." Ayanna watched him quietly, as if trying to read the truth behind his kindness. In the Wild West, strangers were unpredictable, some good, some deadly. But this man's voice wasn't threatening. It carried a calm steadiness she hadn't heard since her husband was alive. Once the children had eaten a small share of beans and dried bread, Ayanna finally spoke. "My husband, Tohano, he died in a bandit raid near the river crossing." Her voice was steady, but her eyes showed the pain she hid. "Our tribe left quickly after the attack. They feared the bandits would return. But with my children sick and the wagon damaged, we fell behind." Luke sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees, listening without interrupting. His face was unreadable, carved by years of dust and quiet suffering. Ayanna continued, her voice dropping lower. "For 2 days we walked. No water. No shelter. I thought maybe this land was going to swallow us." She looked down at her hands. "Then you appeared. Luke cleared his throat, uncomfortable with praise. Anyone would have helped. Ayanna shook her head. No. Many men ride this land. Not many stop. The fire crackled between them. Night settled fully now, stars scattering across the sky like silver dust. The cold air seeped in, but Ayanna's fear brought a different kind of chill. She glanced at her children, curled together on a blanket near the fire. Then she lifted her eyes to Luke, slowly, deliberately. I need more than a warm fire, she said softly. Luke stiffened, sensing where her words were headed but unsure if he was ready to hear them. My tribe is too far, she continued. Winter is near. Bandits roam these trails. My children, her voice broke before she forced it steady again. They will not survive alone. Luke swallowed. I can take you to the next town, maybe find someone. No, she cut him off gently but firmly. A town won't protect us. And no one there will accept an Apache widow with 2 children. She held his gaze with surprising courage. Cowboy, I am asking you. The words hung in the cold air, heavy and brave. Luke froze, his heart thudding in his chest. Ayanna bowed her head slightly, not begging, but pleading with dignity. If you take us with you, she whispered, if you take me as your wife, my children will live. I will work. I will stand beside you. But please, do not leave us to die on this prairie. Luke stared at her, stunned. Her plea wasn't romantic. It wasn't hopeful. It was survival. It was raw, human desperation wrapped in the soft voice of a mother trying to save her children. And in that moment, everything inside Luke Ryder began to shift. For a long moment, Luke couldn't speak. The crackle of the fire filled the silence between them, lighting Ayanna's face in flickering amber. Her eyes didn't beg. They didn't demand. They simply waited, steady, hopeful, desperate, but proud. Luke rose to his feet and walked a few steps away, running a hand through his hair. Marriage. A family. He hadn't imagined anything like that in years. He lived by routine, ride, herd cattle, sleep under the stars, repeat. No one relied on him. No one needed him. And he liked it that way, didn't he? He wasn't sure anymore. Ayanna's words echoed in his mind. If you take me as your wife, my children will live. He pictured the children lying beside the fire, their small chests rising and falling in exhausted sleep. They were fragile, worn down by hunger, the cold, and fear. Ayanna had carried them through days of hopeless walking. How far could she really go alone? Luke felt something tighten inside his chest, a knot he hadn't felt in years. A mix of duty, compassion, and something deeper he wasn't ready to name. He turned back toward her. Ayanna didn't shift. She knelt near the fire, her hands folded in her lap, her chin lifted with quiet dignity. She wasn't bargaining. She wasn't trapping him. She was offering everything she had left. Luke cleared his throat. Ayanna, I need to understand. Why me? Because you stopped, she answered simply. Because you looked at my children the way a man looks when he cares, even if he refuses to admit it. Because the land is dangerous and I cannot face it alone. Luke let out a long breath. He paced, boots crunching over dry dirt. You understand what marriage means? He asked. It ain't a small promise. Yes, she said. In my tribe, a marriage is not just a promise. It is a bond, a shelter, a life shared, good or bad. Her voice held no fear, only truth. I will honor you. I will work beside you. And I will never bring shame to your home. He looked at her closely. She wasn't weak. She wasn't helpless. She was strong, stronger than most settlers he'd met. Stronger than him in ways he couldn't explain. But Luke also knew the consequences. Taking in an Apache widow would bring judgment from townsfolk. Whispered words. Suspicion. Trouble. He'd lived long enough in the West to know how quickly hatred could spread. You understand folks might not take kindly to this? He asked. Ayanna lowered her gaze. I understand. But my children's survival is worth more than their opinions. Luke swallowed. Her honesty hit him harder than anything. He walked to the fire, crouched near her, and looked directly into her eyes. If I take you, he said slowly, there is no turning back. I'm not a man who gives up once he gives his word. Ayanna nodded once, firm, certain. I know. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of fear, hope, and something unspoken. Luke exhaled softly. I ain't promising marriage tonight, he said. But I won't abandon you either. In the morning, I'll take you and the children to my ranch. From there, we'll see what the trail brings. Ayanna's shoulders relaxed, relief washing over her like warmth. It wasn't everything she'd asked for, but it was everything she needed for now. Luke stood, glancing at the stars overhead. For the first time in years, his lonely life had shifted off its familiar path. And deep down, though he wouldn't admit it yet, he knew the trail ahead would change all of them forever. Dawn came quietly, painting the prairie in pale pink and soft orange. Luke packed camp in silence while Ayanna helped her children eat what little breakfast he had left, biscuits and a bit of jerky. The children ate eagerly, their tiny faces brighter than the night before. Ayanna watched them with cautious hope, the morning light catching the tired lines beneath her eyes. When the horse was ready, Luke lifted both children onto the saddle. Ayanna climbed up behind them while Luke walked ahead, guiding the reins across miles of open land. It was a long journey, but far safer than the lonely prairie they had survived. By early afternoon, the land changed. The grass grew thicker, greener. A narrow creek wound through the valley, and beyond it sat a small wooden cabin with a tin roof that glimmered faintly in the sun. Luke's ranch wasn't big, just a modest home, a barn, a fenced pasture, and a windmill turning lazily in the breeze. It was quiet, isolated, but safe. Ayanna stared at it in disbelief. "This is your home?" she asked softly. Luke nodded. "Ain't much, but it's solid." To a woman who had slept on cold dirt for weeks, it looked like a fortress. He helped the children down first, then offered Ayanna his hand. For a second she hesitated, touch wasn't something she gave lightly. Then she placed her hand in his, climbing down with grace. The children ran toward the porch, giggling for the first time in days. Luke found himself smiling faintly. That sound, light, innocent, was something he hadn't heard on this land in years. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of cedar and old leather. Ayanna looked around the single-room home. Wooden table, cast iron stove, shelves of tools, a bed in the corner. She examined everything with gentle eyes, as if memorizing a new world. "You can take the bed," Luke said awkwardly. "I'll sleep in the barn. Ain't no trouble." Ayanna immediately shook her head. "No, we cannot take your space. The floor is warm enough." Luke cut her off. "You've come far. You need rest. Don't argue." His voice wasn't harsh, just firm. She lowered her eyes respectfully. "Thank you." The children curled up on blankets near the fire while Ayanna prepared the first warm meal she had cooked in weeks. Luke watched her quietly as she moved around the kitchen, steady, graceful, and careful with every gesture. He realized she wasn't just cooking, she was trying to show she wasn't a burden. "You don't owe me anything," Luke said suddenly. Ayanna paused, turning slowly. "I know," she replied. "But gratitude is not debt. I help because I choose to." Her words struck him like a slow-moving arrow. She wasn't helpless. She wasn't clinging to him out of weakness. She was a survivor, stronger than the storms of the prairie. That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Luke repaired a broken shutter while Ayanna tucked her children into blankets near the fire. Outside, the horses grazed peacefully. Inside, warmth and life filled the space that had felt empty for years. The cabin still held silence, but it wasn't the lonely kind anymore. Luke sat on the porch under the stars, listening to the faint laughter of the children inside, and realized something unexpected. For the first time in a long time, his home didn't feel like a place for just one man. It felt like the beginning of something new. The days that followed settled into a quiet routine on Luke's ranch. Morning came with the smell of coffee, the crow of distant roosters, and the soft shuffle of small feet on the wooden floor. Ayanna rose early every day, long before the sun fully brightened the valley. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and checked the stove, coaxing the fire alive before the children stirred. Luke pretended not to notice how she had naturally taken over the kitchen, but the truth was, he appreciated it. The cabin had never felt so lived in. Before, he usually ate cold biscuits or jerky, too tired or too alone to bother cooking. Now, the smell of warm cornbread drifted through the room every morning, making the place feel almost like a family home. The children, little Noden and Tala, clung to Ayanna for the first couple of days. They watched Luke from behind her skirts with wide, curious eyes. But Luke had patience. He never pushed, never forced a smile or demanded their trust. He simply went about his work, fixing fences, brushing down horses, and stacking chopped wood beside the porch. Eventually, curiosity overcame fear. On the fourth day, Noden shuffled up to him, holding a small wooden carving he'd found in the barn. "Horse," he asked quietly. Luke knelt beside him. That's right. A wild Mustang. The boy's eyes lit up. From that moment, he followed Luke everywhere like a small shadow. Tala warmed up soon after, calling him, Cowboy Luke, with shy admiration. Ayanna watched these small changes with cautious joy. But life on the frontier wasn't only about work and warmth. Whispers traveled through the nearby town of Redstone Ridge. A cowboy taking in an Apache widow and her children stirred talk, uncomfortable talk. Luke had to go into town for supplies one afternoon, and Ayanna insisted on going along, wanting to show gratitude by choosing her own sewing threads and flour. They rode in on horseback, the children in front, Ayanna behind Luke, her arms lightly holding them. The town went quiet the moment they reached Main Street. Faces stared, some in confusion, some in judgment, some in thinly veiled hostility. Luke felt Ayanna tense behind him. He dismounted slowly and helped the children down. When Ayanna stepped to the ground, a whisper drifted from a store porch. Apache woman, and her kids. Another muttered, Luke Ryder's lost his damn mind. Luke's jaw tightened. He placed his hat lower and guided his small group toward the general store. Inside, the owner, Old Man Whitaker, hesitated before clearing his throat. Luke, didn't expect to see you all. Need flour, Luke said evenly. 2 sacks. And thread. Whitaker's eyes flicked to Ayanna, then back to Luke. Right, as you say. Ayanna kept her gaze low but steady. She never showed fear, only resilience. Luke admired that more than he could express. When they left the store, a rancher called out, Hey Ryder. You trying to raise savages now? Luke turned slowly. His voice came out low, controlled, but deadly calm. Say that again. The rancher swallowed and backed off. No one bothered them after that. Back at the ranch, Ayanna approached Luke while the children played near the creek. Her voice was soft but firm. You stood with us today. Luke shrugged. You're under my roof. Folks better respect that. Ayanna shook her head. No, you protected our honor. My people say a man shows his heart not by words, but by who he stands beside. She paused, looking at him with a depth that made his chest tighten. And today, you stood beside me. Luke didn't know how to respond, so he simply nodded. But that night, sitting on the porch under the stars, he realized something undeniable. He wasn't just helping Ayanna survive. He was starting to want her, and her children, in his life. Not out of pity, but out of something dangerously close to love. The ranch had finally begun to feel peaceful. Days were filled with chores, the laughter of children, and a quiet comfort growing between Luke and Ayanna. But the frontier never let peace last for long. One icy morning, Luke stepped outside to fetch water from the well. The air was sharp and cold enough to sting the lungs. Frost clung to the grass, and the horses huddled close near the barn. He was about to go inside when Dusty, the most trusted horse he owned, snorted and stomped nervously. Luke froze. Horses sensed danger long before people. He scanned the distant ridge. Their dark silhouettes moving against the pale morning sky. 3 riders. Slow, deliberate, watching. Luke narrowed his eyes. Something about them was wrong. Too familiar. Too quiet. Ayanna stepped onto the porch, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Is something wrong? She asked. Luke didn't look back. He didn't have to. His voice turned low, protective. Get the children inside. Ayanna followed his gaze. The moment she saw the riders, her face drained of color. She whispered one word, barely audible. Bandits. Luke turned sharply. The ones who attacked you. Ayanna nodded. I remember their horses. The way one laughed while burning our supplies. I would never forget. Luke's jaw clenched. The riders were coming down the hill now, close enough for Luke to see the smug confidence in their posture. Men who believed no one could challenge them. Luke grabbed his rifle from beside the door and checked the chamber. Stay inside, he ordered. Keep the children low. Ayanna didn't argue. She rushed inside, pulling Tala and Noden close behind a wooden cabinet, whispering soothing words, though fear trembled beneath her calm voice. The bandits reached the ranch gates, reining in their horses with cocky grins. Well, the leader drawled, tipping his filthy hat. Ryder, ain't it? Heard you took in a pretty Apache woman. Mighty charitable of you. Luke didn't raise his rifle yet, but his finger rested lightly near the trigger. You ain't welcome here, Luke said flatly. The second rider, missing 2 front teeth, laughed. We just came for supplies. Maybe a little fun. He glanced toward the house. Ain't every day a man finds himself a widowed squaw. Luke lifted the rifle an inch. Step foot any closer, and I drop you where you sit. The men paused, then the leader's smile twisted into something colder. We killed her husband. You think we won't kill you too? Luke shot first. The bullet clipped the leader's hat clean off, grazing his scalp. The men scrambled off their horses, firing wildly. Bullets cracked through the cold air. Wood splintered off the porch railing as the gunfight exploded around the cabin. Luke darted behind a water trough, firing back with perfect aim. One bandit stumbled, cursing, his arm bleeding. But Luke didn't see the third bandit slipping behind the barn, heading straight for the house. Inside, Ayanna felt the danger closing in. She grabbed her late husband's bow, her hands shaking but determined. She whispered to her children, "Stay hidden. No matter what." Quiet as a shadow, she moved toward the back door. Outside, the third bandit was already climbing the steps, gun raised. Ayanna inhaled slowly, drew the string back, and prepared to fight for her family. The back door creaked as Ayanna stepped onto the porch, bow drawn tight in her trembling hands. Frosted air stung her lungs, but fear sharpened her senses. She saw the third bandit creeping along the wall, his revolver raised toward the window where her children hid. His boots crunched lightly over frozen soil, unaware she was only a few paces behind him. Ayanna steadied her breath. For Tala, for Nodin, she raised the bow higher, pulling the string. Until her fingers ached. The bandit swung around the corner, and froze in surprise. "Well now," he sneered, gun lifting toward her. "Didn't think you'd have fight in you." Ayanna fired. The arrow struck his shoulder with a hard thud, knocking him against the wall. He roared in pain, dropping his gun. Ayanna rushed forward, pulling a second arrow from her quiver, but the bandit lunged, tackling her to the ground. The impact knocked the wind from her chest. The bow flew from her hands. "You little," he growled, reaching for a knife on his belt. Before he could swing it, Ayanna kicked him in the stomach with all her strength. He rolled off her, gasping. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing the fallen knife before he could. "Stay down," she warned, her voice shaking but steady. The bandit glared up at her, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "You're dead either way," he spit. "If Ryder don't fall, my boys will burn this place to ash." Ayanna tightened her grip. "We will not die by your hands." Before the fight could escalate, a gunshot cracked from the front of the house. The bandit flinched. Ayanna's heart lurched, fear not for herself, but for Luke. She backed away from the wounded man and crept along the cabin's side, staying low. Smoke curled from the front porch. The sound of boots stamping and furious cursing echoed across the yard. Ayanna reached the corner and peeked out. Luke was pinned behind the water trough, reloading with quick, practiced motions. One bandit lay face down near the fence, unmoving. The second bandit, the one with missing teeth, fired wildly from behind an overturned barrel. "Ryder," he shouted, voice cracking. "You're dead, you hear me? Dead." Luke didn't flinch. He stepped from cover, aimed, and fired. The bandit ducked just in time, the bullet splintering the barrel inches from his head. Ayanna's pulse pounded. She spotted the third bandit limping toward his horse, one hand clutching his bleeding shoulder, the other reaching for a rifle strapped to the saddle. If he got that weapon, Luke wouldn't survive. Ayanna didn't hesitate. She picked up a fallen stone from the ground and hurled it with all her strength. It struck the injured bandit's wrist. He cried out and dropped the rifle. Luke heard the cry and turned. "Ayanna," he yelled. Their eyes met, his wide with shock, hers burning with fierce determination. "Get inside," he shouted. But Ayanna shook her head. "No. I fight with you." Luke had no time to argue. The bandit behind the barrel rose to shoot. Luke fired first. His bullet hit the man square in the chest, sending him crashing backward in a cloud of dust. The wounded bandit, seeing his partner fall, mounted his horse with desperate speed. But his injury, fear, and panic made the animal buck. He clung on, barely, shouting curses as he fled across the prairie. Silence settled over the ranch. Luke lowered his rifle slowly, breathing hard. Ayanna stepped toward him, still clutching the knife she'd taken from the bandit. Her hands shook. Her knees trembled beneath her. Luke reached her first. "You saved my life," he said, voice thick with emotion. Ayanna swallowed, tears shining but unshed. "We saved each other." Luke gently took the knife from her trembling hands and pulled her into the safety of his arms. For a moment, just a brief moment, the whole world felt still. Inside the cabin, the children peeked out from hiding, and when they saw their mother alive, they ran to her, crying with relief. And Luke knew, with complete certainty, that this woman and these children weren't guests on his ranch anymore. They were becoming his family. Morning sunlight crept over the Wyoming plains, casting a golden glow across Ryder Ranch. Smoke still lingered from the gunfire, drifting like thin ghosts above the frosted ground. Luke hadn't slept. He sat at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a half-cold cup of coffee, eyes fixed on the front door. Ayanna watched him quietly as she washed dried blood from her arms. Her children slept in the other room, exhausted from fear. Each time she blinked, flashes of last night came back, the arrow flying, the knife glinting, Luke's voice shouting her name. She walked to him slowly. "You blame yourself." Luke looked up. "They came for me, Ayanna. You and the kids got dragged into it. You almost," his voice broke, and he looked away. Before she could speak, hooves thundered outside. Luke stood in a breath, hand on his revolver. But when the door swung open, it wasn't bandits, it was Sheriff Hawkins, dust-covered and grim-faced. "Ryder," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Heard gunshots halfway into town. You all right? For now, Luke answered. Hawkins scanned the room, bullet holes in the walls, blood on the floor, Ayanna's torn sleeve. His jaw tightened. Talk, Luke said. You knew those men were coming. The sheriff hesitated, and that hesitation told Luke everything. Ayanna narrowed her eyes. You let them hunt us. Hawkins removed his hat slowly, guilt carving deep lines into his weathered face. I warned you, Luke. You took in an Apache widow, and there's folks out here who don't forgive easily. Luke's fists clenched. Those folks are outlaws. Murderers. And you let them loose. They're more than outlaws, Hawkins said. They're part of the Kelcro gang. Dangerous men with powerful backers. If I jailed one, 10 more would come crawling. Last time I tried, they burned a homestead with 3 people inside. Ayanna swallowed hard. Cowards hide behind fear. You chose fear. The sheriff flinched but didn't argue. Luke stood. You should have warned me. I knew you'd never turn these folks out, Hawkins replied, nodding toward Ayanna and her children. And protecting them would put a mark on your back. They're under my protection now, Sheriff, Luke said. So tell me everything. Hawkins sighed heavily. The gang's leader, Cold Kelcro, he won't stop. The man who rode off last night. He'll go straight to him. Ayanna stiffened. Then more men will come. Yes, Hawkins admitted. And they'll come harder. A heavy silence settled over the room. Luke finally spoke. Then we fight. But not alone. Hawkins blinked. You think I'm gonna put my badge on the line for? You damn well should, Luke snapped. For once in your life, stand on the right side. The sheriff met his gaze, and something changed in his eyes. A quiet resolve, a weary conscience finally waking. I'll send word to the ranchers nearby, Hawkins said. If Kelcro's men are coming, we'll be ready. Ayanna placed a gentle hand on Luke's arm. This is our home now. We defend it together. Luke looked at her, at the strength in her eyes, and nodded. The sheriff stepped outside, mounting his horse. War's coming, rider. Best be prepared. As he rode off, Luke locked the door behind him and turned to Ayanna. We'll survive this, he said softly. Ayanna lifted her chin. We have no choice. But deep inside, she wondered how much more danger her presence would bring, and whether Luke's ranch was worth the cost he might pay protecting her. The first thaw of spring warmed the valley, turning the frost-covered fields into a patchwork of green and gold. Ryder Ranch buzzed with life again, cattle grazing, horses neighing, and children laughing as they ran through puddles left by melting snow. Luke worked the fences while Ayanna tended a small garden she had planted behind the cabin. For the first time in months, the world felt alive, almost safe. After breakfast, Luke found Ayanna sitting on the porch, stitching a patch onto Noden's torn jacket. Her face was calm, but he could see the subtle tension in her hands, the kind born of a woman who had faced death too many times. Luke, she said softly, without looking up. I've been thinking. He leaned against the railing, curious. About. Her fingers paused over the needle. About us. About this life we've built. About what might come next. Luke's chest tightened. He hadn't expected this conversation, not yet. For weeks, they had focused only on survival, on the children, on keeping the ranch safe. Talking about tomorrow was different, dangerous, terrifying, but also necessary. He took a deep breath. I've been thinking too, he admitted. I never wanted a family. Never thought I could, or should. But then you and the children, you've changed everything. Ayanna lifted her eyes to his, steady and unwavering. I asked you once out of desperation, she said. Because I had nowhere else to turn. But now, I want to ask you out of choice. Luke blinked, heart hammering. Choice. Yes, she said, smiling faintly. I choose you, Luke Ryder. I choose this life, here, with you. I choose to stand beside you. And I hope you choose me too. He stepped closer, his shadow falling across her work. Ayanna, I never thought anyone could make me want more than the open prairie. But you've shown me, life isn't worth living alone. Not like I was. Not anymore. Her hands reached out and lightly brushed his, small but deliberate. Then, we choose each other, she whispered. Luke swallowed hard. The weight of his answer carried months of fear, hope, and a promise he hadn't known he could make. We choose each other, he repeated. Ayanna smiled, a mixture of relief and joy, and leaned closer. The wind rustled the budding leaves of the nearby trees, carrying the faint scent of spring. It was as though the prairie itself celebrated their choice. Behind them, the children ran across the yard, laughing. Tala tripped over a rock, and Noden immediately ran back to help her up. Luke watched them, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in years, a sense of home, of belonging, of family. Then let's make it official, Luke said after a moment, a rare smile breaking across his face. No half measures. We marry proper, right here, at the ranch. Simple, small, but ours. Ayanna's eyes glistened. Yes, ours. The sun dipped lower, casting long golden shadows across the ranch. Luke wrapped his arm around her shoulder, and she rested her head against him. For the first time, neither of them worried about bandits, rumors, or the harsh prairie, they only focused on the future they would face together. And in that moment, the lonely cowboy and the brave Apache widow had not just survived the Wild West. they had found a home, a family, and a love worth fighting for. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, wild and free, yet Luke finally knew that no matter how vast the world was, this place, these people, were where he belonged. Spring had fully arrived at Ryder Ranch. The air smelled of fresh grass, wildflowers, and smoke from the morning fire. The prairie, once harsh and unforgiving, now seemed alive with possibility. Luke and Ayanna worked side by side, tending horses, mending fences, and teaching the children to ride. Life was still hard, frontier life rarely wasn't, but it was theirs and they faced it together. One bright morning, Luke took a deep breath and addressed Ayanna. "Today's the day," he said, his voice steady despite the nervous twist in his stomach. Ayanna smiled softly. "The day for our wedding," he said. He had built a small wooden arch beside the creek and decorated it with wildflowers from the garden. It wasn't much, but it was perfect for them. Small, private, just us, the children, and whoever else wants to share the moment. Ayanna's eyes shimmered with emotion. She adjusted Tala's hair and pulled Noden close. "It feels right," she whispered. "Our own beginning." By afternoon, a few close neighbors and ranchers had arrived, curious but respectful. Some had whispered doubt when they first heard of Luke taking in an Apache widow and her children, but now, seeing the love and courage they shared, even skeptics softened. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. The sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the creek as Luke and Ayanna stood beneath the wooden arch. The children held small bouquets of wildflowers, grinning from ear to ear. Luke reached for Ayanna's hands, feeling their warmth. "I promise to protect you," he said, voice strong. "To stand beside you through storms, dangers, and long lonely nights. I will be your partner, your friend, and your family. I will love you and your children as my own, for all the days I am given." Ayanna's voice trembled, but it carried certainty. "I promise to walk beside you, Luke Ryder. To honor our life together, to care for our children, and to face whatever comes, hand in hand. You are my home, and I choose you, now and always." The children cheered as Luke and Ayanna sealed their vows with a quiet kiss. The small crowd clapped, and laughter filled the prairie air. It was a rare, fleeting moment of peace and joy in a land that often demanded strength and courage. After the ceremony, they returned to the cabin. Luke wrapped his arm around Ayanna while the children chased fireflies in the fading light. The wind whispered through the tall grass, as though the prairie itself celebrated the new family. Luke looked at his wife and children, feeling a fullness he hadn't known in years. The dangers of the frontier had not disappeared, they never would, but they had survived. Together, Ayanna rested her head against him. "We're a family now," she whispered. Luke nodded, watching the sun set over the distant hills. "A family," he said. "And no matter what comes, we'll face it together." That night, the cabin glowed with warmth, laughter, and the quiet certainty of belonging. Outside, the prairie stretched endless and wild, but inside, Luke, Ayanna, and the children had found what every soul searches for: home, love, and the courage to endure. In the vast and untamed West, they had fought, survived, and built a life that was theirs. And through all the dust, danger, and heartbreak, the lonely cowboy and the brave Apache widow had discovered something stronger than fear, something that would last far longer than any frontier storm: family.